Welcome to our More Perfect series with leaders who have done extraordinary things to advance our democracy and engage more citizens in it. Today, we are so happy to be in conversation with one of my favorite people, Judy Guskin, who many describe as the mother of the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps has had such an extraordinary and interesting history, and more than 240,000 Americans have served in 143 countries through it. Surveys show that 98%, that's a remarkable percentage, 98% of those who served in the Peace Corps would actually recommend it to their child, grandchild, or other family member. 93% said it improved the perception of the United States globally, and more than 6 in 10 said it influenced their career choices. Judy, this is a very favorable view from those who serve. So welcome to you, and I'd love to begin, Judy, by your taking us back to the very beginning to understand the genesis of the Peace Corps, your role in fostering its creation, and what it's meant to our country and world. So Judy, you were, as I recollected, a student at the University of Michigan in October 1960, when John Kennedy, who was running for president, spoke to the University of Michigan students at that very early hour in the morning and challenged your generation to work in developing countries around the world. Could you share with us that moment, what you heard in Kennedy's call, and the reaction you had and other students had to it?
Yes, let me first put it in context. It was a tough time in the 1960s, very similar, unfortunately, to some things that are happening today. We had a Cold War with Russia and China. There was some conflicts in Laos and the Congo. It was difficult and scary. The Vietnam War was starting and so on. But the students had a sense of hope. And I like to think of what I'm going to say today as all kinds of themes related to the power of hope. And that hope is what we had, and hope is what JFK had. Okay, and why he had it. So I was a student, first-year graduate student in comparative literature. I always wanted to know about the world. I never had a chance to travel the world. My dad was a ham radio operator, so I heard him talk to Africa every now and then. Yeah. Immigrant background, but the best I could do at the time was basically, I'm going to read literature about cultures and languages. I'm going to learn foreign languages, which I did. And that's what I saw my career as, a professor teaching literature. It didn't happen. It happened in a different way, and to my feeling, a better way. So I watched the third debate. First time there ever were televised debates. Let's remember this, okay? It was really significant. The third debate, they weren't in the same room. JFK was in New York, and Nixon was in California. The debate itself was mostly, as most of them were, about the conflicts of war, not about peace. Most of the discussion was about issues of war. And Nixon managed to put JFK on the defensive, talking about some vote he took in his 14 years in Congress that Nixon didn't like. And that was depressing. And JFK that night said to Bobby, I wish I had something new. Okay. Yeah. So he left the site of New York and he went and flew into Michigan to go to sleep. And he had no intention of making a speech. He arrived and met 10,000 students waiting for him for hours in the cold drizzle of the day. It was October already. It was October 14th, 2 a.m. People were happy to be there because the dean, whom nobody really seemed to like, was allowing the women to stay longer. That's the times we lived in. They were happy to be there, but I believe most of them may have been similar in their thoughts as I was. A lot of hope, a lot of fear, some ideas about politics for sure. Many of us read The Ugly American. We knew that there were problems that had to be faced overseas. Many might have been foreign students because we had a large campus of students from Africa and other places.
Interesting.
And we waited there. I was close by. I could see him clearly. I think I even saw Ted Sorensen and Dick Goodwin leave.
Yeah.
They left, got inside to get some food. I don't know if I never asked them if they got the food. There might have been a few apples and bananas, who knows, at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
But they didn't think anything was going to happen because there was no prepared speech. And I think that mattered because something happened. Sarge Shriver called it a spontaneous combustion. Something happened. And why did it happen? He spoke from his heart. He spoke about the things he was most anxious to deal with, which was the new nations of the world, those that were leaving colonialism. And the students wanted to get some hope in the world in this dark age where we were worried, ones my age remember hiding under our desks so that the nuclear bomb wouldn't kill us. Okay, so there was some sense of hope, some sense of not sure what was going to happen. Nobody knew. He didn't know. We didn't know who was going to win this election. He only won by 112,837 votes. My God.
That's good memory.
My God, It was a really close election. So nobody knew, but there was hope in the air.
So, Judy, how did you take this spontaneous combustion, this hope in the air that you and the other students felt? We didn't have iPhones and social media. What did you do next?
Okay, well, we were uncertain even after the speech. People responded well to him. He challenged us. He said, it's urgent. You have to do this now. And why is it urgent? Because peace is in your hands and our democracy is in your hands. And if you don't do something in the next 10 years, we're not going to be able to continue the way we're doing it. So that was something that, me? I'm a student of comparative literature. What do you mean peace is in my hands? What he meant was, and I didn't know it at the time, that 42 new countries had young men who were the new leaders, and they had not had a chance to have an education at the University of Michigan. And they had not had too much chance to know each other. And they had not the skills that maybe was needed to set up a whole country, a new country. And they didn't have the roads. They didn't have all the things they needed. And he had gone to those countries. I didn't know that, but I sensed that urgency and I sensed that desire, and it triggered something. Okay. Still a lot of questions. What? I never thought of going into the State Department or the UN. And I don't know. It seemed, I was humble. It seemed extraordinary for me to think about that. So I didn't do anything that night. Okay. I didn't. A week later, Chester Bowles came to campus. He was our ambassador to India. And guess what? Because of so many students, I could hardly get in the room. I came late. I stood in the back. I tried to hear him, and I liked him right away. There was something about him that was honest. There was something that was experienced. And then he got a question from the audience. By the way, sir, John Kennedy seems to want to have us go to the developing countries. What do you think of that? And he answered, Oh, my son and daughter-in-law are in Nigeria right now. They're doing a great job in the village. That put on a light in my head that said, it's possible. Sure, why not? He didn't know that Kennedy had even given that speech. He had no idea.
Interesting.
But that was very interesting for me. That made it real. And frankly, just an aside, Chester Bowles invited me and my ex-husband to Washington as we were trying to help the Peace Corps happen, and put us in a committee in Congress to tell our story about what we wanted to happen. This is before the Peace Corps was set up. And I met his wife and him in Washington when we were there trying to get Kennedy to set it up, because we didn't give up. Okay.
So Judy, you just a few weeks later, and that's such a wonderful story about, a wonderful story about Chester Bowles. But just a few weeks after the spontaneous speech he gave to the University of Michigan students, you were at Toledo, Ohio airport, and there's a wonderful picture of you in the local newspaper greeting Senator Kennedy. And if you could share with us the scroll, or maybe there's a better term for it, but the scroll that you presented to him and that interaction you had with Senator Kennedy, which Ted Sorensen and others said really got Kennedy enthusiastic, that he ignited something among the young people in the country, really encouraged him to create the Peace Corps. Can you share that moment with us?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to back up a little bit. We wrote a letter saying we wanted to organize a whole campus, that we were committed to go. We set up an organization, a student organization, so we could have access to other students. And we didn't have a mimeograph machine in those days. That's what you needed. But we really made it known. And that letter that we wrote was significant in that it helped mobilize the whole campus. It mobilized Sharon, who at that time was Sharon Jeffries, is now Sharon Lira, and still a friend. She was an undergraduate, and she joined our Americans Committed to World Responsibility, which is what we called ourselves. And she called Mama, and she said, Mom, we're getting a petition. We have 1,000 signatures. People are very excited here. And guess who her mom was? Millie Jeffrey, who was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom later on in her life, was the National Committee woman for Michigan, who was working with the unions. And Millie Jeffrey said, I've got to get this going. I'm in. This is a great idea. And she told one of the speechwriters in Kennedy's campaign, and he said, no, not political enough. But then she said, I remember Ted Sorensen was in the Experiment in International Living. I'm going to get in touch with him. And she did. And so Ted Sorensen and Dick Goodwin and Kennedy got together and made a major foreign policy speech in the Cow Palace in San Francisco. I did not hear the speech. I wasn't even sure, I think, at the time that Millie had hit it, had really gotten to him. So we continued doing our thing until I got a phone call from Millie Jeffrey. And I sat down and she said, the senator wants to meet you, Judy.
Wonderful.
I was really surprised. Okay. So what happened is we got together a few people, we borrowed a car, and we drove to Toledo to meet him. And we brought along the signatures from the petition that the students had signed. He looked at me as I gave him the petition, and I said, Senator, are you really going to do this? And he said, yes, very definitely so. And I said, you can't keep the petition. And he said, I know, you don't have a copy. Okay. And he smiled, probably, wondering how we were going to have any effect on his really coming up with it. Little did he know we were determined Okay. Um, we had contacted other campuses, Princeton, Harvard, small campuses, and letters had been pouring in.
Mm.
Eventually, by the time he got to Washington, 25,000 people were ready to sign up.
Wow.
What did that moment mean? He had hope in his heart that if he took the risk, some people called him naive for it, if he took the risk to say that he wanted a Peace Corps, he would be able to have people signing up.
Yes.
And we kind of told him, yeah, we'll do it. We'll help.
Well,
We'll
Judy,
get them.
you obviously had a big impact because by March 1st, 1961, President Kennedy, by executive order, as you know, established the Peace Corps. And it was those 25,000 young people all across America who truly inspired him to do it. So let me, sending our sons and daughters to countries all over the world for 2 years in an age of scant communication, no cell phones,
Right.
was a truly bold act. Some actually called it a risky experiment.
Absolutely.
And you were one of those volunteers who went to Thailand. Do you think it was a risky experiment? How did it become so widely accepted? And we'd love to hear about your own Peace Corps experience in Thailand.
So it was risky on a political front. It was risky for every person who went there, not knowing whether they would be accepted and what kind of conditions they would face. Why did we do it? Why did all the towns and cities of America feel that this was a good thing? Because of hope. Hope that there could be a better world. Hope that these new countries would survive. Hope that war might be avoided if these countries got what they needed.
It's fantastic. And obviously there were 3 goals of the Peace Corps: an understanding of Americans by people of foreign nations, a better understanding by Americans who were volunteering of people of different countries, and then increased capacity to solve public problems. The first large-scale nationally representative survey of 11,000 returned Peace Corps volunteers, as you know, because you told me you participated. It was remarkable, Judy. The first, you mentioned hope and infusing peace in countries around the world at a time of tremendous conflict, including, of course, the emerging Vietnam War. And what's interesting is the large percentages of returned Peace Corps volunteers who verified that particularly the first 2 goals were met. And even a majority said that they believed it increased our own national security. Give us a glimpse of what your Peace Corps service was like in Thailand, whether you think those findings are valid, and also the public work that you did in Thailand.
Okay. Most volunteers will say that it changed their lives. And many, I don't know how many, it's impossible to tell, have formed relationships to others they never would have been able to meet otherwise for their whole lifetime. And that is true for me too. So how can you not want others to get an experience that will make them better people, more respectful of others, more open-minded, and more ready to serve in a new way, in a new capacity? Okay, I didn't know anything about Thailand, except that when I was working in Washington, I was involved in helping select volunteers that summer. And one of the projects I was working on was Thailand. So I got the magazine, the National Geographic, and I looked up Thailand. And I went and found the one restaurant that served Thai food in Washington, Denny's. Okay. So at the end of that summer, I really had to volunteer. There was no way that I couldn't do it. I was offered a job and staff. I didn't want to be staff. I wanted to be a volunteer. So luckily for me, we were trained in Michigan, so I could get rid of my apartment and all my belongings. And that was because Michigan had very excellent faculty in Thai language, in teaching English as a second language that we were going to be doing, and so on. In Thailand, the timing was perfect for me and my life. And that was that Thailand was expanding education. It had only had 3 or 4 years required education. It wanted to have through high school, which it eventually did. And so it needed teachers. So they just set up some teacher training colleges. They didn't have enough teachers. They certainly didn't have English as a second language there. I went to the Faculty of Education that had just been set up at the major university, Chulalongkorn University. It had been set up in 1957. I was there in 60. And I was given a lot of freedom, a lot of support, and wonderful opportunities to actually develop programs for teachers and principals, not only in terms of English, but in terms of being able to develop a curriculum. And I got a lot of skills that I used when I worked later on in terms of refugees. I worked with the Hmong that I visited in Thailand as a volunteer. I worked with them in Minnesota, St. Paul. I worked with them in Michigan and in Wisconsin. I worked with other refugees as well. In Thailand, it wasn't rough for me, I must say. I had a small house. I didn't have any hot water. I had a problem with red ants every day that I was allergic with. We slept in the netting. Okay, we didn't have any TV. We didn't have any, I don't think we had radio. We had nothing. We didn't have any cell phones. We really didn't have much of a kitchen. But what we had were wonderful colleagues, some of whom were American trained, who went on to be, and students, graduate students and undergraduate, who went on to have wonderful positions throughout the country later on. So I feel it mattered. These friends went on and they really made a contribution.
And it sounded, Judy, like, when idea and fate meet a creative hour, that the government of Thailand wanted to expand educational opportunities right at a time when they needed exactly what Kennedy called for in his third goal, which is increased capacity, in this case, train teachers who could help fulfill that vision. So I remember, Judy, you share with us, how did the Peace Corps influence the rest of your life and the career choices you made? You talked about the ongoing volunteering, helping refugees in Minnesota. Share with us how it affected your career choices.
Okay. I never left the Peace Corps and I never left Vista. Okay. When I came back from Peace Corps in 1964, I was asked to help start Vista, the domestic Peace Corps. I ended up, after Vista, going back to graduate school, and this time changing into a PhD program in psychology and educational psychology. And I started immediately doing research on Head Start, working on desegregation. A few years later, I helped start, as an activist, bilingual education for Hispanics who were coming from there. I never left Peace Corps because I helped Lorette Ruby recruit when she became Republican head of Peace Corps.
Yes.
Never left Peace Corps because they asked me to do 2 documentaries on the 25th anniversary. I was given the honor of putting the wreath on Kennedy's grave, and I was very glad to be in that moment at that place, looking at the flame and thinking about the man who did so much.
It sounds like you became literally a part of not only the Peace Corps, but the Volunteers in Service to America were at the center of the war on poverty, with Vista, with Head Start, probably with Job Corps, all the Sergeant Shriver created programs coming out of the Kennedy administration and moving into the Johnson administration. Was that the experience of others too in the Peace Corps, in your view, that affected their career decisions?
Definitely. When I don't know, because there hasn't been good research on that. I do know that one thing I found is 1 out of every 10 State Department people had Peace Corps experience, most likely.
Yeah.
I know that the Peace Corps has changed how we think about aid. Our new director, Samantha Power, said, we must follow the grassroots idea. We must listen to the people. It must be local. They must be involved. I do know that one of my people, I could talk about our people, one of the people in Taiwan, which is what I was in, got involved in trying to deal with the unexploded bombs that were taking limbs off children. Yeah. I know that another one was a mayor of a town and was very affected by the Peace Corps. I know someone else went to work with an NGO in Laos, married a Laotian, and stayed there. I know that there are friends of peace, friends of the Return Volunteer Group, which started around 65, I believe. Yes. Has many, many stories that they could tell of volunteers, what they did with their lives. Okay. And many were teachers. Many continue to this day because of those groups.
Yes.
Actually doing foreign aid programs, small ones, in the countries in which they served and in other countries as well, depending on what the group wants to do. So service continues.
It does. And in fact, because there was a lack of research that you mentioned, we did the report, A Call to Peace, Harris Wofford and I and Kevin Quigley of the National Peace Corps Association, and more than 6 out of 10 returned Peace Corps volunteers cited that it had a very significant influence on their career choices. Many went into the State Department, the Foreign Service, became diplomats. Like you, the communities of Peace Corps volunteers back in the United States self-organized to be volunteers to help on a whole range of needs. And you mentioned the 25th and 43rd anniversaries, but we were actually together at the University of Michigan on the 50th anniversary, and I was so thrilled to see you and meet you there and see your photo on the wall, actually, with at the time, Senator Kennedy. And Harris Wofford told me that when President Kennedy was coming out of the Oval Office, I guess to unleash Peace Corps volunteers, I think to Tanzania, he said that to Harris Wofford that the Peace Corps would be truly serious when 100,000 Americans were serving abroad every year, with Americans learning languages, understanding cultures and peoples, and waging peace. A wonderful term, waging peace. The Peace Corps deploys less than 8,000 abroad every year. What more do you think we can do today and in the future to fulfill the promise of the Peace Corps as Kennedy envisioned it?
Okay. First, let me say, if JFK were here today with us, he would be happy, because the Peace Corps was not alone. It wasn't meant to be a little thing or even a big thing. It was meant to be a part of a big transformation about our government's approach to foreign aid. And it was. Okay. So I think that even though he would be disappointed in the size, I think he would be happy of the impact as a whole. I do. What we can do now really is political. As you know, the bill to reauthorize the Peace Corps has passed the House, but yet to pass the Senate. And those who don't like it don't understand it. I read recently, someone said, I don't like the Peace Corps, it's just an excuse for people to travel. I mean, you have to understand it, what it is and what it means. because when Kennedy died, my campus was covered with black paper and cloth. My students came up to me and said, "Oh, we're so sorry." People in the villages put Kennedy's picture next to the king who they revered. What did that mean for America? Compassion. He saw them. He saw poverty. He saw disease. He saw the desire to be better and have more opportunities. And the people around the world saw America that way.
Yes.
And our people too. That's why the newspapers were so positive, and they wanted to talk to volunteers and their cousins. And everybody says, "I know someone who went in the Peace Corps," because it's symbolic as well as actual. It says citizens have a responsibility to the world.
Mm.
Americans committed to world responsibility. And that's what Kennedy liked. My peers weren't so sure of that. I felt sure of it. Okay? Citizens matter, and what they do matters. Who are we? We are our compassion. Okay? Saud Shriver, who I dearly adored, worked for many years with him, was the moral leader of the Peace Corps as well as the head of the Peace Corps. I got the honor of introducing him for his first speech, and then I knew him all throughout his life. And he came to big meetings of Peace Corps volunteers, and he said to us, "Serve, serve, serve. Break your mirrors. Don't be so selfish. Don't look at yourself." Okay? So it changes our view of ourselves. Who are we? We're people who care. We got to find ways of showing that. We have to do some action, something. Maybe today it's civil rights. Maybe tomorrow it's refugee education. Maybe it's helping my neighbor who just came from Ukraine and lives in my apartment next door.
Yes.
Okay? So Americans saw that on a one-to-one basis, we are all human. We all have the same hopes for our life, for ourselves and our children. And America can be a partner.
You know, Judy, that's so resonant. After 9/11, when I was in the White House and led the national service and volunteering efforts, and we discovered the Peace Corps is about 5,000, and we grew it to 8,800, and also into East Timor, a predominantly Muslim country, which was very significant after 9/11 because of the targeting of Muslims.
Absolutely.
Remember, President Bush went to a mosque, took off his shoes, read from the Quran, and reminded the American people that these are our neighbors and doctors and lawyers and engineers and people working by our side. And I invited Sergeant Shriver in for lunch to the White House mess, and he shared with me his initial reluctance to leave Chicago, to leave the merchandise mart, to leave his efforts to work on civil rights. But he said, when I took the post of the Peace Corps, I became a better man. And I was able to unleash so many young Americans who discovered the compassion and voice within them to become even better people. So as you witness our difficult environment in America today, our difficult politics that's in some quarters is ripping the country apart, and frankly discouraging young people to enter public service, what advice do you have for them who are trying to find their place in their communities, in their country, in their world? And what's your pitch for the Peace Corps?
First, I want to say that, you know what? Life will be better, folks, if you have a sense of purpose. Think about what you care about. Think about what you really deep down care about. And then rethink it. And then rethink it. It'll change. But seize a moment. And if you see something, find like-minded people. Organize. Get together. Talk about it. Learn about it. Always be open-minded and open-hearted, I guess you'd say. I think that's really important. Forever in our lives, we need to be a person who is curious. Forever, we need to have heart about others. I would say to the youth, don't give up. It's hard work. That's what JFK said. He said, peace isn't something you can get in a moment. Peace is complicated. It depends on so many factors, okay? And he wanted to say, it doesn't depend, I don't want it to depend on bombs. I don't want it to depend on nuclear war, but I want it to depend on people willing to fight for what they feel is just, to be open-minded, always curious, and be compassionate.
How wonderful, Judy. You know, President Kennedy went on to sound the trumpet in his inaugural with that now very famous, really 2 words, ask not. And you have put a extraordinary scratch on history. Is there anything else you would like to share about your experience in being the mother, the godmother of the Peace Corps and also Vista before we close?
I would just say I'm one person. I was lucky enough to, as Bobby Kennedy said, you know, bend, what was the word exactly? But
The arc,
bend
the arc of
arc
history.
of history, you know. But he said, each of us can work to change a small portion of events. It is from numerous diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. I would say, let's make some history. Let's do some good things. Let's help our youth be strong and much more knowledgeable than I was about what's happening in Africa today, for example, that some of which is very difficult for me to even read about in some countries. Let us make them understand that peace is not a simple thing, and that it is a matter of people working together. And that's true for our country too. Work together on a common purpose with hope, humility, and respect.
Judy Guskin, you are a ripple of hope that Bobby Kennedy talked about so eloquently. And you embody the spirit of asking not what the country can do for you, but what for you can do for the country and the world. And our More Perfect initiative, which is an initiative of all 14 presidential centers, from President Obama to President Hoover, the National Archives Foundation, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, many partners across the United States who are working together to advance 5 democracy goals, putting citizens at the center of being knowledgeable about democratic norms, values, institutions, and being engaged in their country and in their world. We're working to advance national and international service and volunteering as Democracy Goal 2. And you epitomize what Doris Kearns Goodwin talked about at our launch when she said, all transformational change across American history began initially with citizens who emerged to do something extraordinary for their communities and their country, and in your case, the world. So on behalf of More Perfect and our series to connect to extraordinary leaders like you, we want to thank you for your service to our nation and to our world. And thank you also for joining our National Leadership Council so you can continue to inspire generations of young people. Bless you.
Bless you.